Hello, psychology students. Mr. G back here with another lesson from our psychology course. This is the first topic of our second unit, testing and intelligence. So we're going to cover how different intelligence levels are measured as far as testing. We're going to talk about people with learning disabilities as well and how that is found out as well. So it's a really interesting topic. You're going to be taking a couple of your own intelligence classes, tests in class. So hopefully you'll get to learn a little bit about yourself as well. And we'll be watching a film about a young man named Radio. There's a movie about him also called That Radio. And he obviously had some major intellectual disabilities, but he still won the heart of his town and did a lot of great things to encourage people. So, yeah, so God can use anybody regardless of how they're labeled as far as their intelligence is concerned. So, let's head into this here as I drink my cup of coffee, relaxing here. One quote by an intelligence psychologist, one of the most famous out there is Dr. Howard Gardner. And this is his quote about intelligence. I really like this. Intelligence is the ability to find and solve problems and create products of value in one's own culture. I think that was very interesting because for many years, um, it has been, intelligence has been defined is quote unquote how smart you are. Um, you know, and honestly, there are people out there that have scored average IQ, even a little on the lower side of IQ, who've gone on to do some very successful and powerful things. And so the question that we're going to really try to answer in this particular unit is intelligence, one's ability to be successful, regardless of IQ score, or is intelligence is how smart you are? And again, what does that mean, right? And or is intelligence the one's ability to simply solve new or what they call novel problems, right? Even though they may not be like real book smart type people. So here's ways that psychologists actually measure intelligence. So we have assessments. I'm sure you've heard that term thrown around in most of our classrooms here at Delmarva Christian, right? Those are basically evaluations or tests of your ability on a particular topic or skill or something like that, right? And then you have what we call achievement tests. So those would be like your advanced placement or AP tests. They measure your level of knowledge of topics and your skill in applying that knowledge to unique situations. So AP tests do that. Actually, you could even argue a lot of the SATs and ACTs, PSATs are like that as well. And then you have what we call aptitude tests. So aptitude tests measure your ability in certain areas like numerical or math and so on, verbal, mechanical reasoning. So, and even sometimes, what is that one you take to get into the military? The ASVAB test, right? Many people would consider that as an aptitude test that gives the military an idea of where you would best fit, you know, as far as jobs and stuff like that in the actual branch of the military you want to go in, right? All right, so where does intelligence tests, like when was the first time they were done? How far can we go back to find that? Well, we have to go back to Sir Francis Galton and his intelligence testing that was done very, very early in the game here, maybe like late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was I guess the first attempt to really measure intelligence, but it was very biased. It was out of Europe. It was biased toward, um, rich and white males who were the ones that were mostly taking this. So it wasn't something that was tested across the platform, across both genders or different, races of people. But one thing that was kind of brought out from it is the idea is intelligence something you inherit, and Galton did believe that there was a genetic basis for intelligence. I don't know if we can answer that. Some people claim it. but I don't know how you measure that. Again, it's going to go back to this nature versus nurture argument, right? Is it in your nature, your genetics that make you as smart because somehow down the line of your ancestors they were quote unquote smart? Or is it how you're raised? Were you nurtured in a certain way that has made your intelligence what it is? Or maybe is it some type of combination of both, there's a lot of questions out there that a lot of times it's theoretical. But the issue of intelligence being inherited, unfortunately, there was some people that picked up on this and they try to even say different race groups were smarter than the others. Breeding, the idea of what we call eugenics was a big thing in that. Reproduction, so getting a very smart woman together with a quote unquote very smart man and having them have a child. And so you could breed quote unquote smarter kids, right? And then there was sterilization for those with quote unquote less desirable traits. Margaret Sanger, back in the 1920s and so on, she was a very big advocate of eugenics. She helped start Planned Parenthood, which today is one of the largest abortion providers in America. Of course, back during her time, she couldn't get abortion done. So one way to quote in her mind to breed out or to get out the less desirable was through sterilization. You may have been in my U.S. history classes and learned how she sterilized black women or what was called imbecile or poor white women. You might have heard of the story of Carrie Buck. Carrie Buck was a poor white woman from, I can't remember, some state, and they didn't want her to have children anymore because they wanted her to breed more imbeciles, stupid kids, crazy. And they forcefully held her down and sterilized her. Um, this is the type of thing we got to be careful about when you're defining what intelligence is, and stuff like that. Because sadly, the Nazis will take this on. And they're going to study what Galton is saying as well as what Sanger is saying. And that's going to help them, in their mind, try to breed this master race of superhumans, right? Which they believe are the Aryan, blonde-haired, blue-eyed German people. And if there were any German people who were not, or what they would call mentally feeble, those people were sent away, put into the camps, right? So this is the type of thing that you got to be careful with this intelligence idea. So here's a couple ideas here about Adolf Hitler and Margaret Sanger, two one of the most biggest proponents of what we call eugenics, breeding people for desirable traits, like they're puppies, like they're dogs or something. And think about in many ways the death toll from the seeds of what these women, I mean, this man and this woman came out with, whether you look at it through abortion and the millions of babies that have been killed in that, or you're looking at it through the Holocaust and the death of 60 million people throughout Europe because of Hitler's ideas. One of Hitler's quotes in this is, by the skillful and sustained use of propaganda, one can make a people see even heaven or hell, or an extremely wretched life as paradise. That's very twisted thinking to see heaven and hell as paradise? Or Margaret Sanger, we should apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation that grade a population whose progeny is tainted. In other words, get rid of the black people or try to keep them as little as possible. Or even if they're white, if they are not intelligent enough, they need to make sure they can never breed. Unbelievable. And God sees everybody as someone created in his image. So no matter who you think is more intelligent or not, we're all created in God's image. That's the truth. And God can use us at any point, no matter what our skills and stuff we were born with. God can use anybody. So be careful about that type of thinking. So anyway, as we go further. Aging and intelligence. So here's some interesting theories on that one. Raymond Cattell, he was a psychologist who studied what we call crystallized and fluid intelligence. So he's two types, he said. They actually combine to make up your intelligence. And that would explain why intelligence remains relatively constant over one lifespan. Like you learn up a bunch of stuff up to a certain age, and then even your vocab knowledge kind of they found through testing, regardless of your age, you do hit some type of part where you've learned enough that you need to know in your vocabulary, right? But though what does happen, they found out that, of course, memory declines as you age, right? Of course, your reasoning ability as you age, declines, and the way you could visualize your vision declines, and the speed at which you can memorize and do tasks to those are things just part of aging. But he did say your crystallized intelligence remains usually intact over your whole lifetime. It's just what happens is when the mind begins to go, depending if someone develops, dementia or um, Alzheimer's disease of some type, that would affect one's ability to bring out, the info that they know. And then there's a fluid intelligence, one's reasoning ability to quickly respond to new info. That's kind of interesting through someone's time period. So part of this is what we call the Flynn effect that they noticed through intelligence test scores, which really didn't start in the world, or at least the United States, until right around the time of World War One, late 1910s, right? And then they, of course, noticed that people were doing even better and better on these intelligence scores, increasing throughout the 20th century. So, did the intelligence tests get better at testing intelligence, or did our education system simply improve through that time? Um, or whatnot. Hello. Hey, how's it going, buddy? Okay, we're back here. Sorry about that. Had a little had to take care of a little something. But anyway, there's your Flynn effect. Let's jump into people with intellectual and other disabilities. So, how is that even like figured out? Okay, well, someone with a intellectual disability is someone whose IQ score is more than so someone that has an intellectual disability is usually one that whose IQ scores is two more standard deviations below the norm. So kind of show you what that looks like. But back in the day, and this term now has kind of not become extinct, but it's definitely not a term that's considered politically correct or even sensitive. The word mentally retarded, definitely a much older term that psychologists used. But it had a big negative connotation with it, stigma. Unfortunately, people in my generation, just to be stupid, would call, oh, you're retarded or whatever. Or you would even say, this thing's not working, it's retarded. And in a sense, it many people thought that that terminology was used to kind of demean the group of people who struggle, who have a disability in the area of intellect. So, and usually now, again, we're using the word someone who has an intellectual disability. We're not using that term mentally retarded. But they have usually three areas they're challenged with. Number one, social skills, interacting with others, conceptual skills, planning for the future, working with money, they're going to definitely need somebody to help monitor them and even advocate for them when they're in those situations. And they may struggle in areas of what we call practical tasks, day to day, just living skills, taking care of themselves, getting from point A to point B. And there's some that do very well, even independently. But a lot of that has been because someone has come alongside to them, cared for them, and showed them how to do it. Back in the day, way back, we're talking 50 to 100 years ago, people like this were considered the throwaways of society. And God does not see any human being in that way. Remember, we're all created in God's image. So the movie Forrest Gump kind of this was movie was made how like 32 years ago, but the movie kind of showed how a man who has intellectual disabilities could still on go on to do some pretty good things. Was he the smartest school-wise or whatever book-wise? No, but he can fight pretty good in a war. We saw that. He was very amazing at putting a weapon together. He can run like the wind, as he said. He had really good skills with people too, and um, what do you say? And he became a very good shrimp boat captain with the help of Lieutenant Dan, of course. That was huge that he had people in his life, like his mother. He had Bubba, who looked out for him in the military. He had Lieutenant Dan, who kind of looks out for him as an adult still. This is actually a picture from the movie Forrest Gump when I guess the principal's trying to explain to mom why he can't go to the regular school, and it does show kind of like in the IQ realm, like most people fall within this range here, but Forrest fell below state standards of being able to go to a regular school, but she advocated for him and he eventually did go to a regular school, right? So, but anyway, here's actually kind of what educational psychologists would classify each IQ range score. And we're going to look at IQ and we're going to be a little bit, what's the word I want to use? Critical, as I don't think that's the only test that would define what intelligence is. IQ stands for intelligence quotient, by the way. But they say someone with a 145 to 160 IQ is what they consider very highly advanced. And I'm talking maybe academically, right? Gifted or very advanced, superior. Again, most people fall within this range of IQ, right? Again, Forrest Gump was considered an intellectual disability. Once you're starting to head below 80, someone is considered either mildly impaired to severely impaired or delayed. Okay. One of those that have been classified under intellectual disabilities are people with Down syndrome. So if you had Down syndrome, you have a child born with Down syndrome, they've been born with that, what they call a 21st chromosome. They have an extra chromosome, which allows their features to manifest in the way you've seen them, right? With the round face, flat face, slanted eyes, regardless of their race, right? Brain size and weight are usually below average, and they may have issues, especially if they're not receiving any type of physical therapy, but maybe some issues with muscle movements, slower, and so on. But a lot of these, again, folks with Down syndrome, some have actually gone on to do some pretty amazing things athletically. Some have gone on to live independently, even though maybe their IQ scores have 20 or below, but if not treated in infancy. Now, if you can very early on get a child with Down syndrome, get them into a special school, they can definitely have a higher IQ and be a lot more vocal and verbal and do very well as an adult. Some have even gotten married, and things like that. So, and there's a lot of recent breakthroughs for people with Down syndrome that will even help theoretically to restore their brain size and repair some disabled chemical pathways in their brain. So that's why maybe some of you have seen people with Down syndrome and they're like, wow, they talk pretty well and wow, they can do this on their own. They don't seem clumsy, and there's been a lot of great things with that. So God can use anybody, right? Remember that. We're all created in his image. So in class, we're going to watch a film called Radio. Now, Radio doesn't had his real name was Robert Kennedy. Okay. And he was named after the president or the guy who ran for president, Jimmy John F. K's brother. We're going to watch a movie about him. And that, by the way, that's the real Radio with his mentor, Coach Jones, who, radio was kind of going around town, kind of in his little shopping cart, and people kind of made fun of him or avoided him as the town freak or whatever. But Coach Jones one day kind of took radio under his, took him under, under his shoulders there and helped him be a part of the Anderson high school team and everything like that. And radio became very beloved in the Anderson, South Carolina community. And, even in his later years, radio's passed away now, but Coach Jones really looked out for radio, kind of became his caretaker, especially after his mother died. By the way, here's a picture of Cuba Gooding Jr., who plays him in the movie with the real radio. Again, his name was James Robert Kennedy. That's right. James was his real first name, but he passed away back in 2019. But again, he became like a fixture in the Anderson, South Carolina community. Like he was still running out with the football team, like past the year 2000, and everybody loved radio, did the guy ever learn to read and write? No, but he did develop skills enough to be around people and to show love and to be there and teach people a few things here or there. So, anyway, all right. So, people on the other end of the intelligence spectrum, or what we call considered giftedness. And so, those would be people that would have standard deviations two or more above that norm level. Okay. Number of those people like around those 150, 160 score of IQ. About 2 to 3% of people receive this gifted label. There's even schools or programs in schools for people who are gifted, kids who are gifted. But one psychologist did a study on folks like this, whether it's in music or whatever. There's some people that, like in this realm, they're good at everything. Like at least academically speaking, they're good at music, they're good at math, writing, reading, science, everything. They did say that their giftedness did not necessarily align with the stereotypes, though, that people put out there for highly intelligent people. Like some of them actually lived normal lives, working regular jobs. They weren't all becoming scientists and engineers and stuff like that. Another psychologist, his name was Joseph Renzulli, he said giftedness is actually made of three factors. And he said it wasn't necessarily genetics because he studied some of these kids, their parents were like normal IQ or whatever. But he said, yeah, definitely intelligence is a factor, the ability to be creative and come up with new ideas and then have motivation to do it. So that was very interesting. It's not necessarily from mom or dad they're getting that. Some of them it's just implanted in there by God. So let's delve into IQ a little bit more. So again, IQ stands for intelligence quotient. All right. So William Stern is the one who created this formula for Terman's intelligence test. He was the guy who created this. But basically, it's your mental age divided by your chronological age, your normal age, whatever, and then you multiply that by 100, that gives you your IQ score. And most people score right around the average, a little or above 100, right? So this is kind of where most people are, maybe even a little bit higher up in here, right? Statistically, 3 out of 100 people who take this IQ test are going to score above a 130, and then 3 out of 100 are going to score below 70. All right. But it shows if children, now, if you're giving these to kids, especially, a lot of school districts actually have educational psychologists that they pay, and that a lot of them are also in charge of monitoring this, testing kids, and so on. So it helps them understand placement for the kids, how to support them, how to create IEPs, individualized education plans, and so on, right? But there are criticisms and problems with the IQ. Remember, traditional IQ tests don't measure all forms of intelligence that someone can have, right? The test makes no provisions for any form of linguistic, that's the ability to speak well and come up with good vocabulary and how you do that. No provisions for people who are incredibly artistic, either with their hands or with music, or even their mechanical abilities. I mean, there are people that would score average IQs, but man, do they know how to put together a car or a car engine or build something? there's a particular intelligence to that that would be over and above, right? And so now a new wave of educators and psychologists have tried to redefine what intelligence actually involves. And they have devised new ways to test it as well. So intelligence tests, the one big thing to probably take away from this, they need to make sure they're free of any type of bias toward one racial group, toward an economic group, toward one educational situation, right? And you also have to make sure it's culture fair too. What would be considered intelligent for one culture might be much different in another culture. So, so I'm going to have you guys take this IQ test. We'll watch a thing on YouTube about it as well. But here's the big problem with the IQ test. And remember, I was mentioning it only measures for three types of intelligence: verbal intelligence, logical, and math, which are all three of these are stuff found on the left side of your brain. Isn't that interesting? So it doesn't mention anything that would be out of the right side, which would be, a lot of your artistic type things, your ability to manually manipulate things, and so on. So Howard Gardner, I believe he was from Harvard University. He came up with a whole new type of intelligence test. All right. And he was realizing, and I'll tell you why. He was like, man, there's a lot of successful people out there who do not do well in regular IQ tests. Why is that? And they're very successful at what they do, even. And they live very great lives. And so he's like, I've seen a problem here. Traditional IQ tests are just questioning people on things that require prior academic knowledge of info because it only tests in those three areas that I was showing you: verbal, right, or linguistic, right? I'm sorry, verbal, mathematical, and if you look back at it, and logical, like science type things. So is intelligence, he was asking then, is it a single ability or is it a range of abilities? And again, you have very smart, gritty, successful people not doing well on traditional IQ tests, and but they're still intelligent in some other ways. So he decided to come up with a test. And I think it was originally seven intelligences. Now I think he's got it. I think he's still alive, I believe. Let's find out here on this. Is Howard Gardner still alive? Yes, he is. So he is 80, he'll be 83 years old. So he is still alive. But Howard Gardner has, I think at last look, he's gotten up his test and measuring nine different intelligences. Yeah. And here's another thing that him. I don't know if you ever heard of people who are savants, right? Um, a lot of them can be on the autistic spectrum, but they're very functional people. They can function and, high functioning is what they would call it. But like some of these people that are savants will score very low on IQ tests, but will have extraordinary abilities to map out something, to memorize certain facts, to be able to explain away very well certain things. But they're savants. And see, this is another thing he's looking at. It's very scientific, I think. He's learning to question what is the established way of thinking and saying, hey, let's observe some other things here and experiment with that and say, hey, maybe there's an alternative way of looking at intelligence. So this is his test. It actually, or his nine different intelligences and what they measure, right? So he said, in his studies, there is a spatial intelligence that's visualizing the world almost in a 3D and being able to memorize things very well by looking at pictures and things, even having like a mapping out in your brain. I think I score high on this intelligence. I really do. Maybe not as high as others because I still have an issue with looking at geometric shapes and stuff like that. That would probably give me a 10 out of 10 on that intelligence. There's high, what we call, or low in linguistic intelligence, communicating through words, right? I that is one area that I actually score high in. Naturalistic intelligence, understanding living things and reading nature and being able to kind of understand different plant forms, memorize those, identify them and being able to really understand animals and love them. There's certain people who are just naturally gifted in that way. I scored high there. I do not score very high in the musical intelligence, to be honest. But these folks can play, recognize musical patterns, and almost do it instantaneously. They could probably even hear a song once and be able to play it with their musical instrument just after hearing it once. I mean, they can, it's just some people that are gifted that way. I would not be surprised David from the Bible, who later became king, would not be surprised he was gifted in musical intelligence. There is also logical mathematical intelligence. I score really low in this one. But we need all kinds, don't we? Right? These are the people that quantify reasoning. They have incredible logic, linear thinking. They know how to plan out really well. They could do mathematical computations. They're really good scientists. Definitely people like that. There's what we call now, this is his newest intelligence. It's called existential intelligence. It's understanding the whys of the world and why we're here. Some people think that this one is a little controversial. Like, how do you measure this one? But it is kind of like you're the philosopher type. There's people with high bodily kinesthetic intelligence. I kind of score in the middle in this one. Like you have incredible motor skills, physical ability, and it could be just manifesting itself in a range of ways, right? It can simply be, you're really good mechanic and you know how to put things together. You're really good with Legos, or it can be more in the athletics or dancing or things like that. I mean, some people in the high bodily kinesthetic, they're like could be good in multiple sports. And then you have an intrapersonal and interpersonal intelligence. People intelligence is interpersonal. It's being able to understand and communicate with others, kind of read people, know how to like, relate to people. And then there's like your personal, I know me, interpersonal intelligence and one's own thoughts and feelings. I mean, these people tend to be maybe a little less outgoing than these guys naturally, but still, sometimes being able to know yourself better, right, can help you relate better to other people. So I think they could work together. But this is everything that this is a big, big theory, intelligence theory that Mr. Howard Gardner came up with. And so I would say, God has placed different abilities in different parts of the brain. I would definitely agree with that. Scripture seems pretty keen on that. And the concepts of smart and stupid really don't make sense. Instead, it depends on our giftedness, training, and natural abilities. And you see in God's word just a litany of those things, how God even used people despite maybe even sometimes their lack of ability, but somehow God helped compensate for that. Moses was kind of a shyer guy, not great with words, and he even asked for Aaron to come along with him and be his voice box. And maybe Aaron was at times, but you see clearly where Moses is speaking directly to Pharaoh, directly to the people, and even the fact that he wasn't necessarily gifted in that. So, there's something to always consider. So, you guys are going to take Gardner's multiple intelligence test in class. And again, it's broken out by section, each of the 9 different sections, and you'll see that here. Okay. Verbal linguistic, or what we call So we'll go into this in a little more detail in class, but I'm just going to quickly break down each of the intelligences again. You have the verbal linguistic, what you call word smart people. Okay. A lot of them make really good lawyers and journalists. They know how to talk to a crowd, right? And know how to write things, right? Logical people, right? These are your people. They actually score very well on those traditional IQ tests because IQ tests test heavily for this one, right? And I thought this was interesting. This is a brain scan of somebody actually while they were taking a SAT test, right? By the way, this is the left side. I'm sorry. Yeah, this will be one's left side of the brain and right side. Okay, I know you're looking at it in different ways, but this is as if the person was faced to the front, so their eyes would be here. Okay, so I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm trying to think here. If I'm facing this way, left. I'm sorry. Their eyes would be here. My fault. And you can see here where the left side of their brain here is a lot more activity going on. That's how we know logical and mathematical reasoning come from that left side of the brain, right? And someone with a lower or average SAT, definitely, yeah, there's some lighting up going on the left side of their brain, but the activity for the high score of math on the SAT, you can definitely tell there was a lot more activity and things going on there, right? People who are high in the visual spatial intelligence, people are really good artists, can sometimes fall into these as well. Bodily kinesthetic, a lot of your athletes, dancers, people who are good with working with their hands. You have the high musical intelligence people. They actually, something interesting about people with high musical intelligence, like language, music is a way to express yourself, right? And there's also timing and scales and musical notation. And people that tend to be good in math, a lot of times will also be good in music as well, or vice versa. My son, I would definitely say, is someone here. I think he has high musical and mathematical intelligence. Interpersonal intelligence. We've talked about people who are really good at speaking to crowds, whether you like Trump or Obama or hate them. I got to say this, they love to go out there and talk and relate to people. And they will read the room. Now, sometimes Trump, will he say stuff no matter that maybe comes across as a little rough? Yeah. But one thing about Trump, though, if you ever watch him, he loves to negotiate with people. He loves to kind of, he'll talk to anybody. He'll try to, but if you cross him, oh boy. Anyway, intrapersonal, that's knowing yourself. Even though FDR, I think, was very high in the interpersonal intelligence, I think the very fact that he knew himself well, he knew his limitations, he had had polio, but he also knew how to overcome those crippling effects to help the country through it. I think he was somebody who was very self-aware, high in the interpersonal. There's the naturalist intelligence. We talked about that. Biologists, park rangers, foresters tend to probably be high in this intelligence. And then there's that existential intelligence. Again, knowing the big pictures, the wheres and whys of the world. Again, this is more of the controversial of the nine intelligences due to how is it measured, really. But can intelligence be increased? I do believe parents have a responsibility to provide a rich environment, so do schools, to help cultivate a child's intelligence. Even just spending quality time with a child can make all the difference in the world. Taking your kid out, nature and just showing them things and working with them, sitting down and reading with them. All those things will help a child. They're going to hear reading modeled so that way they'll know how to well read. They'll see you as you're out in nature and how you react with it. They'll know how to be responsible themselves with nature, right? So I would encourage you also ask God to increase your intelligence in an area. I believe if that's something that is His will and His calling for you, and you want to do get better in a certain area with like relating to people, interpersonal intelligence, or maybe you want to learn a musical instrument, but you kind of struggle learning, but maybe you're like, hey, God, I really feel called to do this. Can you help me increase my musical intelligence to do this? I believe God can do that if it's His will, right? So the other theory, so we talked about IQ tests, again, very limited in what they measure. Then there's Gardner's multiple intelligences, which kind of gives us nine ways at looking intelligences. Another intelligence psychologist was Robert Sternberg, and he came up with the triarchic theory of intelligence. He kind of narrows it down to just three intelligences, kind of like the IQ test, but different. So he agreed with Gardner, right, that traditional IQ tests aren't good at assessing all the overall intelligences, and that intelligence is made up of a range of abilities. but he disagreed with Gardner having nine different ones. He said it's just three or triarchic, right? He said it comes down to practical intelligence, your ability to solve everyday problems, street smarts, common sense, analytical intelligence, which is usually tested by traditional IQ tests, more like your academic book smart knowledge stuff. And then there's creative intelligence, right? That is the ability to come up with novel or new solutions to problems, that you have the ability to have divergent thinking in which one can come up with multiple ways to answer a problem or to solve something. So that's where it'd be kind of really cool if I could find that test and then we give that one too. We'll see if we can find that one. But here's like a bigger view of that pyramid of the triarchic intelligence of Robert Sternberg. This is '05. Again, this is very new. And Gardner's is newer, but I think Sternberg's is the newest out of all of them. All right, so that's intelligence. Hopefully, you got with a few stops and starts and pauses there, but you at least got a little idea what that is and how we measure it and ranges from people who have intellectual disabilities to giftedness. But either way, I'm sure you also know that God has given us all gift. He's created us in his image, and he can use each of us in different ways, right? And that's just how it is. It's good to be different from others, right? In that place. All right, y'all have a great day and God bless you.